A smile in the shadows. Brooklyn's summer heat wrapped the streets in a stifling embrace, the sun casting sharp golden rays that danced on the asphalt and metal alike. Among the bustling throng of commuters and the ceaseless cacophony of honking horns, Michael's small frame seemed almost lost. Yet there he stood, a fixture on the corner of Flatbush Avenue, a cardboard box at his feet stacked neatly with bottles of water. His sneakers, worn thin at the soles, shifted slightly as he adjusted his stance, preparing for another day. "Water, $1. His voice rang out, clear but strained against the backdrop of a city that often ignored him. His tone carried more than the simple offer of hydration. It was a call of determination, a lifeline for someone too young to bear the weight he carried. Michael's smile, however, was his secret weapon. It was practiced and bright, a shield against the judgmental glances and the indifferent stares of passers-by. His mother had always told him that a smile could open doors, even when life seemed determined to shut them in his face. For Michael, it wasn't just about opening doors. It was about survival. An elderly man paused near him, leaning heavily on his cane. His gaze landed on Michael, and his brows furrowed. For a fleeting moment, Michael wondered if he would be the first customer of the day. "Young man, why aren't you in school?" the man asked, his voice rough like the scraping of sandpaper. Michael's grin widened, though the question stung. "I go to school, sir," he replied, his tone cheerful and without hesitation. "But school's out for the summer. Selling water helps me save up." The man seemed unconvinced, but reached into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled dollar. He handed it to Michael and took a bottle. "Stay out of trouble," he muttered before shuffling away. Michael watched him go, tucking the dollar into his pocket with a soft sigh. $1 closer, he thought, even though he knew the mountain ahead was steep. The medication his mother needed wasn't just expensive, it felt insurmountable. And with every passing day, her condition seemed to grow worse. The specter of her illness loomed over their tiny apartment, a constant reminder of why Michael stood here under the scorching sun. A group of teenagers sauntered past, their laughter ringing out as they pushed and shoved each other playfully. One of them, a tall boy with a backpack slung over one shoulder, caught sight of Michael and smirked. "Hey, look at this guy," he said loudly, nudging one of his friends. "Water boy." The others laughed, and Michael felt a flush creep up his neck. Still, his smile never faltered. "Water, $1, he repeated, ignoring the taunts. The tall boy stepped closer, his shadow falling over Michael. He grabbed a bottle from the box, twisting the cap open, and taking a long swig. "Thanks," he said, turning to walk away. "Hey, you gotta pay for that," Michael called after him, his voice trembling slightly. The boy stopped, glancing over his shoulder. "What are you gonna do if I don't, huh?" Michael's fists clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to relax. "Just, please," he said softly. "I need it." The boy hesitated for a moment, something flickering in his expression. Then, with a shrug, he pulled a dollar from his pocket and tossed it onto the sidewalk. "Whatever," he muttered before walking off. Michael bent down to pick up the crumpled bill, smoothing it out as best he could. It was dirty, but it was still money. He added it to the small wad in his pocket, his determination unshaken. As the day wore on, the foot traffic ebbed and flowed. A young mother with a stroller stopped to buy a bottle, her toddler reaching out with chubby hands to grab it. A construction worker on his lunch break handed Michael $2, saying, "Keep the change, kid." Each transaction was a small victory, a tiny step toward his goal. But not everyone was kind. Some people ignored him entirely, their gazes sliding past him as if he were invisible. Others sneered or muttered under their breath about child labor or kids these days. Michael learned to tune it out, focusing instead on the faces of those who stopped, the ones who saw him. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement, Michael's spirits lifted slightly. The dollar bills in his pocket felt heavier now, a tangible reminder of his progress. He allowed himself a small moment of hope, imagining the relief on his mother's face when he brought home the medicine she needed. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb nearby, its windows tinted. Michael watched as the window on the passenger side rolled down, revealing a man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair and a sharp suit. His gaze landed on Michael, and he raised an eyebrow. "Hey, kid," the man called out. "You selling water?" Michael straightened up, grabbing a bottle from his box. "Yes, sir. Cold water, just $1. The man smiled faintly, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a crisp bill and handed it to Michael. "Keep the change," he said, taking the bottle. Michael blinked, looking down at the $20 bill in his hand. He looked back up at the man, his eyes wide. "Sir, I don't have change for this." "Don't worry about it," the man said, his tone dismissive. But as he twisted the cap off the bottle, he hesitated. His eyes scanned Michael's face, taking in the too bright smile, the dirt-smudged cheeks, and the wariness that no 8-year-old should carry. "You out here every day?" the man asked, his voice softer now. Michael nodded. "Yes, sir. God help my mom." The man's expression darkened slightly, and he seemed to struggle for words. Finally, he said, "Why does your mom need help, kid?" Michael hesitated, his practiced smile faltering for just a moment. "She's sick," he said quietly. "I sell water so I can buy her medicine." The man stared at him for a long moment, the bottle of water forgotten in his hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "What's your name?" "Michael," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded slowly. "Michael, my name's John. And starting today, you're not doing this alone anymore." Michael's heart skipped a beat, and he felt a strange mix of relief and fear. He wanted to believe John, but life had taught him to be cautious. Still, as John stepped out of the car, his presence solid and steady, Michael felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. A stranger's promise. The streets of Brooklyn never truly quieted, but as the day wore on, the sharp hum of life softened to a dull roar. Cars continued to weave through the tight lanes, and pedestrians shuffled about with their heads down, but the frantic rush of the morning had faded. Michael, still clutching his cardboard box and the water bottles within, stood next to John, whose sleek black car now felt like an alien presence on the cracked, grimy pavement. "Where's home, Michael?" John's voice was calm, but his eyes were heavy with something Michael couldn't quite place. Concern, maybe, or something deeper. Michael hesitated. His home wasn't something he showed to strangers. It wasn't like the places he'd seen on TV or through the windows of cars like John's. Home for him meant peeling wallpaper, the faint smell of damp, and his mother's soft voice, weaker with every passing day. "It's not far," Michael said finally, his voice barely carrying above the noise of the city. He shifted on his feet, his gaze darting to the ground. "But you don't have to come. Really, I'll be fine." John knelt down, his face now level with Michael's. His tailored suit seemed out of place against the backdrop of the street, but his eyes held steady. "Michael," he said gently, "I don't know you well yet, but I can see you've been carrying something much too heavy for someone your age. You shouldn't have to do this alone. Let me help." Michael's chest tightened. He wanted to say yes, to trust this man who seemed genuine, but the instinct to protect his world, his fragile, vulnerable world, was strong. "My mom," he began, then stopped, the words catching in his throat. "She doesn't like strangers." John nodded, understanding flickering in his expression. "I'll stay outside if that's what she wants. I just want to meet her, Michael. Maybe see if there's something I can do for both of you." Michael studied John's face, searching for any sign of insincerity. But all he found was a quiet determination that reminded him of the way his mother used to look at him when she told him stories about a better future, a future she believed in, even if it seemed impossible now. "Okay," Michael said finally, his voice small but steady. He adjusted the cardboard box under his arm and turned toward home. It's this way. The walk to Michael's apartment was short, but to John, it felt like stepping into another world. The glossy storefronts and bustling cafes gave way to crumbling buildings, graffiti-tagged walls, and the faint scent of garbage that lingered in the humid air. John had seen poverty before, but walking through it now, alongside a boy who should have been playing in a park or reading a book, hit him in a way he hadn't anticipated. "Is this where you're always selling water?" John asked, breaking the silence. Michael nodded, his gaze fixed ahead. "It's a good spot. Lots of people pass by. And sometimes they stop. And sometimes they don't," John added, his voice soft. Michael shrugged. "That's how it is. Not everyone has money to spend on water." "I get it." John felt a pang in his chest. The way Michael spoke, with such an adult understanding of struggle, was a reminder of just how much this boy had grown up too soon. When they reached the apartment building, Michael paused at the entrance. The door's paint was peeling, and the buzzer panel was rusted, with several names crossed out or missing entirely. Michael glanced back at John, his face wary. "It's not much," he said quickly, as if preemptively defending the place. "But it's home." John gave him a reassuring nod. "Lead the way." They climbed the narrow staircase in silence, the creak of the wooden steps filling the air. Michael moved carefully, as if trying not to disturb the building itself. When they reached the door to his apartment -7B, Michael stopped again, his hand resting on the doorknob. "My mom. She doesn't like people seeing her when she's sick," he said, glancing up at John. "She says it makes her feel weak." John crouched down slightly, meeting Michael's gaze. "I understand. I'll stay right here in the hallway if that's what she wants. But let her know I'm here to help, not judge." Michael hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He pushed the door open, stepping inside with his box of water bottles. "Mama, it's me," he called softly, his voice carrying through the small space. John waited just outside, the door slightly ajar. From his vantage point, he could see the edge of the living room, a tiny space with a threadbare couch and a stack of old newspapers. The walls were yellowed with age, and the single window was cracked open, letting in a faint breeze that did little to ease the stifling heat. "Michael, you're back," came a woman's voice, weak but filled with warmth. "Did you do okay today?" "Yeah, Mama," Michael replied, his tone cheerful. "I did okay. And I brought someone who wants to meet you." There was a long pause, and then the woman spoke again, her voice laced with both curiosity and apprehension. "Who is it?" John decided to speak up, keeping his tone gentle. "Mrs. Rivera, my name is John Harrison. I met Michael today while he was selling water. I just wanted to check in, see if there's anything I can do to help." Another pause, and then the sound of shuffling. A moment later, Angela appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame for support. She was pale, her face gaunt and her eyes tired, but there was a spark of determination in her gaze as she looked at John. "You said you met Michael?" she asked, her voice steady despite her evident frailty. John nodded. "Yes, I saw how hard he was working, and I couldn't just walk away. He's an incredible boy, Mrs. Rivera. You've raised someone truly special." Angela's lips curved into a small, sad smile. "Michael's all I have. He's the reason I keep fighting." John's throat tightened at her words. He could see the love and pride in her eyes, but he could also see the exhaustion, the fear of what might happen if her body gave out before she could see Michael grow up. "Mrs. Rivera," John began, his voice firm but kind, "I'm not here to intrude, but I've seen enough today to know that you and Michael shouldn't have to keep doing this alone. I have resources, connections, that could make things easier for you." Angela's expression shifted, a mix of gratitude and wariness. "We've gotten by so far," she said softly. "It's not much, but we manage." John stepped closer, his hands open in a gesture of sincerity. "I can see that you're strong. Both of you are, but no one should have to just manage. Let me help. Whether it's medical care, groceries, or even just giving Michael a chance to be a kid again. Please, let me do something." Angela looked at Michael, who was watching her with wide, hopeful eyes. He didn't say anything, but his expression spoke volumes. She let out a shaky breath, her fingers gripping the doorframe for support. "All right," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "If it's for Michael, we'll accept your help." John nodded, relief washing over him. "Thank you," he said softly. "I promise you won't regret it." As Angela retreated back into the apartment, Michael turned to John, his face a mix of emotions. "You're really going to help us?" John placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "I'm going to do everything I can." For the first time, Michael's practiced smile gave way to something real, something filled with cautious hope. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe that things might actually get better. The weight of kindness. The next morning, Michael woke to the faint hum of conversation coming from the living room. For a moment, he panicked, his heart pounding in his chest. It was rare to hear voices in their apartment that weren't his or his mother's. He threw off the thin sheet that barely kept the night chill at bay and crept to the doorway of his small bedroom. Peeking out, he saw John sitting on their worn couch, a cup of coffee in hand, talking quietly with his mother. Angela looked different, brighter, somehow. Though her thin frame was still wrapped in a faded blanket, there was a spark of energy in her expression that Michael hadn't seen in months. John leaned forward, speaking with a calm intensity, his voice low but clear. "I've already made some calls," John was saying, his tone reassuring. "There's a doctor I know who can come and take a look at you. No hospitals, no big bills. Just a house call. Let's start there." Angela's hands trembled slightly as she held her own cup, the chipped porcelain looking delicate in her frail grip. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly, her voice cracking. We've been trying to manage on our own for so long." John smiled warmly. "You don't need to thank me, Angela. Just focus on getting better." Michael stepped out hesitantly, his bare feet silent on the worn linoleum floor. Both adults turned toward him, and Angela's face softened immediately. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentle. Michael nodded, his eyes darting to John. "You're still here," he said, his voice laced with surprise. John chuckled. "I told you I wasn't going anywhere, didn't I?" Michael's stomach fluttered with a mix of gratitude and unease. He wasn't used to people sticking around. Too often, promises were made and then broken, leaving only disappointment in their wake. But John seemed different. At least, Michael hoped he was. "Why are you helping us?" Michael asked, his voice small but direct. "You don't even know us." John set his coffee cup down on the rickety table and leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "You're right, Michael. I don't know you. Not yet. But yesterday, when I saw you out there on the street, I saw a kid who's braver than most adults I know. A kid who's doing everything he can for the person he loves most in the world." He paused, his eyes softening. "And I guess I saw a little bit of myself in you." Michael frowned, confused. "You were like me." John smiled faintly, leaning back against the couch. "Not exactly. I didn't have to sell water, but I grew up in a house where every dollar mattered. My mom worked 3 jobs just to keep us afloat. I remember what it felt like to go to bed hungry, to watch her come home exhausted, and know there was nothing I could do to help." His voice grew quieter. "That's why I worked so hard, to make sure I'd never feel that helpless again. And when I see someone like you, fighting the way you are, I can't just walk away." Angela's eyes glistened with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. Michael stared at John, his chest tightening. He wanted to believe the man, wanted to believe that someone with so much could care about someone with so little. "So, what now?" Michael asked cautiously. John grinned. "Now, we get started. A day of firsts." True to his word, John arranged for a doctor to visit that same afternoon. Michael sat cross-legged on the floor, watching nervously as the physician, a kind woman named Dr. Patel, examined Angela with quiet efficiency. She asked gentle questions, taking notes and nodding thoughtfully as Angela explained her symptoms. "You've been incredibly strong," Dr. Patel said finally, her tone warm. "But you're dealing with some serious health issues, Angela. With the right medication and care, I believe we can improve your quality of life significantly." Angela nodded, her expression a mix of relief and apprehension. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. As Dr. Patel packed up her bag, she turned to John. "I'll send over the prescriptions and a list of recommendations," she said, "and I'll check in regularly to monitor her progress." John nodded. "Thank you, Doctor. We'll take care of it." After the doctor left, Angela sank back into her pillows, her face pale but peaceful. "She said I could get better," she murmured, almost as if she didn't believe it. "You will, Mama," Michael said quickly, his voice filled with quiet determination. "You just need the medicine." Angela reached out and squeezed his hand weakly. "I'm so proud of you, baby," she said. "You've been my strength." That evening, John took Michael out to get groceries, a task that felt surreal to the boy. They walked the aisles of a store much larger and brighter than the corner bodega Michael was used to. John pushed the cart, filling it with fruits, vegetables, and other staples that Michael had rarely seen at home. "Go ahead," John said, gesturing toward a shelf of snacks. "Pick out something you like." Michael hesitated, his hand hovering over a box of cookies. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. John nodded, smiling. "Positive." Michael grabbed the cookies, clutching them to his chest like a treasure. For a moment, he felt like any other kid, standing in a grocery store with someone who cared about him. When they returned to the apartment, Angela's eyes widened at the sight of the bags of food. "This is too much," she said, shaking her head. "We can't accept all this." John waved her off. "It's not too much, Angela. It's just enough." As they unpacked the groceries together, Michael couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was enough. Enough food, enough hope, enough light to push back the darkness that had hung over their lives for so long. Seeds of hope. In the weeks that followed, John became a regular presence in their lives. He helped arrange for a nurse to visit Angela and brought Michael books and school supplies to keep him busy. He even started teaching Michael how to budget the money he earned, though the boy still struggled to understand why someone as wealthy as John would care about numbers at all. "You'll need this skill someday," John said one evening as they sat together at the kitchen table. "Money can be a tool, Michael, and you've already proven you know how to work hard for it. Imagine what you could do if you had the right tools." Michael nodded, though he didn't fully understand. All he knew was that for the first time in years, life felt less heavy. But even as things improved, Michael couldn't shake the fear that it wouldn't last. He had seen people come and go, promises made and broken. Would John stay? Or was this just another fleeting kindness? One evening, as they sat together watching Angela rest, Michael finally voiced his concern. "What happens when you get tired of helping us?" he asked quietly, staring at his hands. John looked at him, his expression serious. "Michael, I'm not here to fix your life and then disappear. I'm here to make sure you and your mom have the foundation you need to stand on your own. And when you do, I'll still be here, just in case you need someone to lean on." Michael blinked, surprised by the sincerity in John's voice. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that this man might actually mean it. As the sun set over Brooklyn, casting its warm glow through the apartment's cracked window, Michael sat with John and his mother, feeling something he hadn't felt in years: the quiet, steady comfort of hope, a glimmer of stability. Brooklyn mornings had their own rhythm. The streets came alive with the hiss of bus brakes, the chatter of street vendors setting up shop, and the distant wail of sirens weaving through the city's fabric. For Michael, mornings had always been the start of another uphill battle. But now, As he woke to the smell of fresh coffee and the faint sound of his mother humming from the next room, the world felt different. Stretching in his small bed, Michael took a moment to savor the quiet. The apartment, though still modest and cramped, carried a warmth now that hadn't been there before. He could see it in the neatly stocked cupboards, feel it in the cushiony softness of the new blanket John had brought for Angela, and hear it in her voice, which grew stronger with each passing day. Michael padded into the living room to find John sitting at their kitchen table, reading a newspaper. A steaming mug sat beside him, and he looked up with a smile as Michael entered. "Morning, champ," John said, folding the paper and setting it aside. "How'd you sleep?" Michael shrugged, still unsure how to respond to the casual kindness that seemed to flow so easily from John. "Good," he mumbled, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "You?" John chuckled. "I sleep just fine. But I'll tell you what, these chairs of yours, not great for the back." Michael's face flushed with embarrassment. "Sorry. They're old." John waved a hand dismissively. "Don't apologize, kid. I'm just teasing. We'll get you some new ones soon." Angela emerged from the bedroom a moment later, her steps steadier than they had been in months. Her face, though still pale, was brighter, her cheeks holding a faint hint of color. She smiled at Michael, her eyes crinkling at the corners in a way he hadn't seen in a long time. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "Did you remember to brush your teeth?" Michael rolled his eyes, but a grin tugged at his lips. "Yes, Mama." John stood, clearing his throat. "Angela, you're looking better every day," he said, his voice warm. "How are you feeling?" Angela smiled at him, the gratitude in her expression unmistakable. "Better," she said simply. "Thanks to you." John shook his head. "You're the one doing the hard work. I'm just making sure you have what you need." A new routine. As the days turned into weeks, Michael and Angela's lives began to shift in ways they hadn't thought possible. With John's help, Angela started physical therapy sessions at home, building back the strength her illness had stolen from her. Each day, Michael watched her grow more vibrant, her laughter coming more easily, her voice carrying more weight. Michael, too, found his world expanding. For the first time in years, he wasn't spending his days on the street corner, hawking water bottles to strangers. Instead, he spent his mornings reading the books John had brought him, devouring stories about far-off lands and brave heroes who overcame impossible odds. In the afternoons, John would take him out, to the library, to the park, even to a community center where Michael discovered a passion for painting. One afternoon, as Michael carefully brushed blue paint onto a canvas, John watched from the side, his arms crossed and a smile playing at his lips. "You've got talent," John said. "Ever think about being an artist someday?" Michael paused, his brush hovering over the canvas. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I never really thought about what I'd be when I grow up." "Well," John said, crouching beside him, "you've got plenty of time to figure it out. But if you ask me, you've got the heart of someone who can do anything." Michael looked at John, his chest tightening. No one had ever said anything like that to him before. Most people saw him as a kid selling water, nothing more. But John saw something different, and for the first time, Michael began to wonder if he could see it too. The shadow of the past. Despite the progress they had made, Angela couldn't shake the gnawing fear that it could all disappear in an instant. One evening, as she sat with John at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, she voiced the thoughts that had been weighing on her. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice trembling. "What if this doesn't last? What if something happens to you, or to us? We've been surviving for so long. I don't know how to trust that things can stay good." John leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Angela, I get it. Life hasn't given you a lot of reasons to believe in stability. But here's the thing. You're not alone anymore. I'm not going anywhere. And neither is the support we've built around you." Angela nodded slowly, though doubt lingered in her eyes. "But what if?" John held up a hand, cutting her off gently. No what-ifs. We'll face whatever comes together. You've already done the impossible, Angela. You've raised an incredible son and kept going, even when the odds were stacked against you. You don't have to do it alone anymore. Tears welled in Angela's eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of gratitude, of release. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had found a way out of the darkness. A day to remember. A few weeks later, John surprised Michael and Angela with tickets to the zoo. It was a simple gesture, but for Michael, it felt like stepping into a whole new world. He had never been to the zoo before, never seen animals up close except for the pigeons and stray cats that roamed the streets. As they walked through the sprawling park, Michael's eyes grew wide with wonder. He marveled at the giraffes stretching their long necks toward the trees, the elephants splashing water onto their backs, and the monkeys swinging playfully from branch to branch. John watched Michael's excitement with a quiet smile. Seeing the boy so carefree, so full of joy, was worth every dollar he had spent. "Thank you, John," Angela said, her voice soft but steady. "For everything." John turned to her, his expression serious. "You don't need to thank me, Angela. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" she asked. "Keep letting me help," he said, "because seeing you and Michael like this, it's the best thing I've ever done." Angela nodded, her throat too tight with emotion to speak. Seeds of a future. As the sun set over Brooklyn that evening, casting a golden glow over the city, Michael and Angela sat on the small balcony of their apartment, watching the lights of the skyline twinkle like stars. For the first time in years, the weight on their shoulders felt lighter. There was still work to be done, still struggles to face, but they weren't alone anymore. John had shown them that kindness, when offered freely and without expectation, could change lives. And as Michael leaned his head against his mother's shoulder, he allowed himself to dream, not just of tomorrow, but of a future filled with possibility. The road to self-reliance. Brooklyn wore a soft glow as the weeks transitioned into months. The city, always teeming with life, had started to feel less like a battlefield for Michael and Angela, and more like a place where they could begin to rebuild. The cracks in their lives weren't entirely mended, but they were no longer crumbling under the weight of despair. Michael's mornings now began with purpose. He no longer woke with the dread of another day on the street corner, calling out to indifferent passersby. Instead, he spent his mornings buried in books or sketching quietly at the kitchen table while his mother supervised. Angela, with her newfound energy, had taken to tidying the apartment and preparing simple meals, determined to reclaim her role as caretaker. But it was John's steady presence that remained a cornerstone of their progress. He continued to guide them, offering advice, resources, and, most importantly, hope. One afternoon, as they sat together in the living room, he laid out his next idea. "It's time to think about the future," John began, his gaze fixed on Angela. "You're doing better, Angela, but I know you don't want to depend on me forever. We need to get you back on your feet, not just physically, but financially." Angela nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I've been thinking about that," she admitted. "I used to work as a receptionist at a dental office before I got sick. I don't know if I can handle something like that again, but I'd like to try." John leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "That's a great start. How about we ease into it? Maybe part-time work to start. I know a friend who owns a small boutique. They're looking for someone to help with scheduling and managing the front desk. It's low stress and flexible." Angela hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of her sweater. "I'd like to try," she said softly. "I need to try. For Michael." Michael looked up from his sketchbook, his heart swelling with pride. "You can do it, Mama," he said with quiet confidence. "You're the strongest person I know." Michael's first lesson in giving back. One Saturday, as Michael and John walked through their neighborhood, Michael noticed a young boy sitting on the corner with a cardboard box. The boy couldn't have been more than 7, his small frame dwarfed by the heavy bags slung over his shoulders. A handwritten sign next to him read, "Lemonade, 50 cents." Michael stopped, his chest tightening. He recognized the look on the boy's face, the determined smile masking the weariness, the quiet hope that someone would stop and help. It was like looking into a mirror of his past self. "Can we buy some?" Michael asked, tugging on John's sleeve. John nodded, smiling. "Of course." They approached the boy, who straightened up and flashed a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Lemonade, 50 cents, he said, his voice high and clear. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled dollar bill. "I'll take 2 cups, he said, handing over the money. The boy's face lit up as he quickly poured 2 cups of lemonade from the pitcher on his box. "Thank you," he said, his voice brimming with gratitude. Michael accepted the cups, but instead of drinking, he crouched down to the boy's level. "What's your name?" he asked. "Caleb," the boy replied, his small hands clutching the pitcher nervously. Michael nodded. "I used to sell water, just like you," he said. "It's hard work, isn't it?" Caleb blinked, surprised. "You did." Michael smiled, glancing up at John, who stood quietly, watching the exchange. "Yeah. My mom needed help, so I started selling water to make money. But someone helped us, and now things are a lot better." Caleb's eyes widened. "Really?" Michael nodded firmly. "It gets better, Caleb. Just keep doing your best, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it." Before they left, Michael handed Caleb the 2 cups of lemonade back. "Keep the dollar," he said with a grin. "You deserve it." As they walked away, Michael looked up at John, who was smiling proudly. "You're already paying it forward," John said. "That's what it's all about, Michael." Angela's first day. Angela's first day at the boutique was a mix of nerves and triumph. The owner, a kind woman named Rosa, welcomed her warmly and took the time to show her the ropes. Angela's responsibilities were straightforward: answering phones, scheduling appointments, and tidying the small space. But every task felt monumental. It wasn't just a job. It was a symbol of her resilience. Michael and John stopped by at the end of the day to surprise her. As Angela stepped out of the boutique, her face lit up when she saw them waiting on the sidewalk. Michael ran up to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "How was it?" he asked eagerly. Angela laughed, a sound that was beginning to feel less foreign. "It was good," she said, her voice steady. "I think I'm going to like it here." John gave her an approving nod. "I had no doubt you'd do great." For Angela, that first day was more than a step forward. It was proof that she could reclaim her independence. And for Michael, seeing his mother smile like that made every struggle they had faced feel worthwhile. The strength of a community. As time went on, Angela and Michael began to feel the ripple effects of John's influence in their lives. With his encouragement, they started to build connections within their community. Neighbors who offered support, teachers who encouraged Michael's artistic talents, and even local shop owners who welcomed Angela as a friend. Michael's art became a source of pride and joy, not just for him, but for those around him. John arranged for Michael's paintings to be displayed at a small gallery in the neighborhood, and to their amazement, a few pieces sold. The proceeds went straight into a savings account that John helped Michael set up, a small but significant step toward a secure future. Angela, too, flourished. The job at the boutique gave her a sense of purpose, and her health continued to improve with regular care and medication. She even began volunteering at a local community center, sharing her story with others and offering encouragement to those facing similar struggles. A new beginning. One crisp autumn evening, as they sat together around the small kitchen table, Angela spoke words that carried a weight of triumph. "Michael," she began, her voice steady but emotional, "we're not just surviving anymore. We're living." Michael looked at her, his heart swelling. He thought of all the nights he had spent on the street corner, the ache in his legs, the sting of rejection. All of it had led to this moment, a life where they could dream again. John, sitting across from them, raised his glass of iced tea. "To the Riveras," he said, his voice filled with pride. "To strength, resilience, and the brightest future ahead." They clinked their glasses together, laughter filling the small apartment. It wasn't just the sound of joy. It was the sound of a family rediscovering what it meant to hope, to believe, and to thrive. A new chapter begins. The night of the Youth Art Showcase was electric. The community center buzzed with the hum of conversation, laughter, and quiet admiration for the talent displayed on the walls. For Michael, it was surreal. His artwork, once confined to scraps of paper in their tiny apartment, was now framed and displayed under the bright lights for strangers to see. The center had transformed into a gallery, with each artist given their own corner to tell their story through brushstrokes, lines, and colors. Angela stood by Michael's side, her hands clasped together tightly as she watched people linger at his display. Each piece told a story. One showed a bright sun shining over a cracked street, a clear nod to Michael's days selling water. Another depicted a woman sitting at a small table with her hands cupped around a steaming mug, her face glowing with hope, an unmistakable tribute to Angela. "This is your best one," Angela said, gesturing to the portrait of a man in a sleek suit crouching next to a young boy holding a water bottle. The man's face was kind, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder. Michael smiled. "That's John," he said simply. Angela nodded, her throat tightening. She didn't need the explanation. The artwork spoke volumes about how much John had changed their lives. Just then, a man in a charcoal gray suit approached, his hand extended toward Michael. "This is yours?" he asked, pointing at the display. Michael nodded, a mix of pride and nerves washing over him. "Yes, sir." The man smiled warmly. "You have an incredible gift. My name's Henry Clark. I run a nonprofit organization that supports young artists. I'd love to feature your work in one of our programs." Angela's eyes widened, and Michael blinked in surprise. "You mean, like an art class?" "More than that," Henry replied. "We help young artists showcase their work to larger audiences and even connect them with mentors who can guide them. We also provide scholarships for students who want to pursue art full-time." Michael's heart raced. "You think I could do that?" Henry chuckled. "Michael, I don't just think you can. I know you can. Your work tells a story, and that's what great art does. It makes people feel something." Angela placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "What do you think, sweetheart? This could be a big step." Michael looked up at her, his mind racing. He thought about all the times he had sketched by the dim light of their apartment, never imagining that his work could mean something to anyone beyond their small family. Slowly, he nodded. "I'd like to try." Henry smiled. "That's all we need to hear. I'll be in touch with the details." As Henry walked away, Angela pulled Michael into a tight hug. "You did this, Michael," she whispered. "All of it. I'm so proud of you." A celebration of progress. After the showcase, John suggested they celebrate. He took them to a small family-owned restaurant a few blocks from the community center, where the scent of freshly baked bread and simmering spices greeted them warmly. They sat at a cozy corner table, the soft glow of candlelight illuminating their faces. Angela raised her glass of water, her eyes shining. To Michael, she said, her voice steady and full of pride. For his talent, his strength, and his heart. Michael blushed, ducking his head. But he raised his glass too. "To you, Mama, for never giving up." John smiled, lifting his own glass. "And to both of you, for showing the world what resilience looks like." The clink of glasses felt symbolic, a quiet acknowledgement of how far they had come. The meal was filled with laughter, stories, and plans for the future. For the first time, they allowed themselves to dream big, paying it forward. As the weeks passed, life continued to blossom for the Riveras. Angela's job at the boutique grew into a full-time position, and Rosa even entrusted her with managing the store when she was away. Angela discovered a knack for organizing and customer service, and the steady income allowed her to start saving for the first time in years. Michael, meanwhile, began attending the nonprofit's art workshops. The program introduced him to new techniques, materials, and mentors who encouraged him to push his boundaries. He met other young artists, forming friendships that expanded his world beyond the confines of their apartment and the streets he once walked. But Michael never forgot where he came from. One afternoon, he asked John if they could revisit the corner where he used to sell water. When they arrived, Michael spotted Marcus, the boy they had helped weeks earlier, sitting on the same curb with his chores for hire sign. Michael approached him, this time holding a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. "Hey Marcus," he said, crouching down. "How's it going?" Marcus looked up, his face lighting up with recognition. "Hey Michael. It's better. My mom got some help with her medicine, and I don't have to work as much." Michael smiled. "That's good to hear. I brought you something." He reached into the bag and pulled out a sketchbook and a set of colored pencils. "I thought you might like these." Marcus's eyes widened as he took the supplies, his hands trembling slightly. "For me?" he asked. "Yeah," Michael said. "I used to draw a lot when I was out here. It helped me get through the tough days. Maybe it can help you too." Marcus stared at the sketchbook for a moment, then looked up at Michael, his expression full of gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly. Michael patted his shoulder. "You're welcome. Just remember, things can get better. You're stronger than you think." A new home. One crisp winter morning, John surprised Angela and Michael with news that left them speechless. "There's a new apartment complex opening nearby," he said. "I pulled a few strings, and I think we can get you two into one of the units." Angela's eyes widened. "John, we can't." "You can," John interrupted gently. "It's affordable, safe, and close to everything you need. This isn't charity, Angela. This is a fresh start." Michael's heart soared at the thought. Their current apartment, though filled with memories of their journey, was still a reminder of the struggles they had faced. A new home meant more than just a new address. It meant a chance to redefine their lives. When they toured the apartment, Angela couldn't hold back her tears. It was small but clean, with freshly painted walls, and a view of a park where children played. Michael's room was bright and cozy, with enough space for a small desk where he could work on his art. "This is it, Mama," Michael said, his voice full of wonder. "This is home." Angela nodded, her hand covering her mouth as she fought to contain her emotions. "It's perfect," she whispered. The ripple effect. As the Riveras settled into their new lives, their story began to inspire others in the community. Angela volunteered at the nonprofit where Michael attended art workshops, sharing her story with other families who were struggling. Her resilience and determination became a beacon of hope for those who felt lost. Michael's art continued to gain recognition, and he started teaching younger kids at the community center, showing them how to use their creativity as an outlet for their emotions. His pieces were featured in local galleries, and he even sold a few, saving the money for his future education. John remained a constant in their lives, not as a savior, but as a friend and mentor. He watched with pride as Angela and Michael grew into their new roles. Angela as a provider and Michael as an artist with a voice that resonated far beyond the confines of their small apartment. A future full of promise. On a sunny spring day, as they walked together in the park, Angela turned to John. "We wouldn't be here without you," she said softly. "You gave us more than help. You gave us hope." John smiled, shaking his head. "You had it in you all along. I just gave you the tools to see it." Michael ran ahead, laughing as he chased a group of pigeons. Angela watched him, her heart swelling with pride. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't dared to believe in before, a sense of peace. As they sat on a bench, watching Michael sketch in his notebook under the shade of a tree, Angela leaned back and closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the sun wash over her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it, strong, supported, and unafraid. Their story was no longer one of survival. It was one of triumph, resilience, and the unshakable bond between a mother and her son. And as they looked ahead, they knew that this was only the beginning of a life rebuilt, a life filled with promise. Expanding horizons. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of their new apartment, casting golden patterns on the walls. Michael sat at the small desk in his room, sketching furiously. His latest piece wasn't just another landscape or portrait. It was a vision of his journey. On one half of the page, he depicted a young boy on a street corner, clutching a box of water bottles. On the other, he drew the same boy standing in an art gallery, holding a paintbrush and smiling. As he worked, Angela's voice called from the kitchen. "Breakfast is ready." Michael set down his pencil and bounded into the kitchen. The smell of scrambled eggs and toast filled the air. Angela stood at the stove, her posture straight and confident. The Angela who once struggled to move without pain now radiated energy. Michael couldn't help but smile at her transformation. "Smells good, Mama," Michael said, pulling out a chair. Angela placed a plate in front of him, then sat down with her own. "So," she began, her tone casual but excited, "are you ready for tonight?" Michael paused, mid-bite. "What's tonight?" Angela gave him a knowing look. "The gallery opening, of course. Don't tell me you forgot." Michael's eyes widened. Oh, right. His nerves kicked in at the thought. His work was being featured in a prominent gallery downtown, a far cry from the community center where he'd first displayed his art. The event felt monumental, and the pressure was beginning to sink in. Angela reached across the table, placing a hand on his. "You're going to do great," she said. "Remember, every piece tells a story, and your story is worth sharing." A chance encounter. Later that afternoon, Michael met John at the gallery to help set up. The space was bright and modern, with white walls and high ceilings. Michael's paintings had been carefully arranged along one section, each accompanied by a small plaque detailing the inspiration behind the piece. As they worked, a man in a tailored suit approached them. He looked to be in his late 40s, with sharp features and an air of authority. "Are you Michael Rivera?" he asked, his gaze landing on the young artist. Michael nodded cautiously. "Yes, sir." The man extended his hand. "I'm David McAllister. I run an art scholarship foundation. Your work caught my attention during the youth showcase last month." Michael shook his hand, his mind racing. "Thank you, sir." David smiled. "You've got a unique perspective, Michael. Your pieces are raw and emotional. They connect with people. I'd like to discuss the possibility of sponsoring your education. Have you thought about art school?" Michael blinked, stunned. "Art school? I mean, I've thought about it, but I didn't think it was something I could do." David's smile widened. "Well, it is. My foundation provides scholarships to young artists with potential, and you've got plenty of it. Let's set up a meeting to talk more." Michael barely managed to stammer out a thank you before David walked away. He turned to John, his heart pounding. "Did that really just happen?" John clapped him on the shoulder. "It did, kid. And you deserve it." Angela's quiet triumph. While Michael was busy preparing for the gallery event, Angela had her own milestone to celebrate. Rosa had invited her to a meeting with a potential investor for the boutique, a sign that Angela's hard work and dedication hadn't gone unnoticed. As Angela entered the small cafe where the meeting was set to take place, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had come a long way from the days when just getting out of bed felt like an insurmountable challenge. Now she was sitting across from a businesswoman who could help take the boutique to the next level. "Angela," Rosa said, turning to her with a warm smile, "I wanted you here because you've been such an important part of our team. Your ideas and organizational skills have really helped the boutique thrive." Angela flushed, humbled by the praise. "Thank you, Rosa. It's been such a blessing to be part of this." The meeting went smoothly, And by the end, Rosa had secured the investors' support. As they walked out of the cafe, Rosa turned to Angela. "You know, I've been thinking about promoting you to assistant manager. You've proven you're more than capable." Angela stopped in her tracks. "Assistant manager? Are you sure?" Rosa nodded. "Absolutely. You've earned it." Tears welled in Angela's eyes, but she blinked them away, a smile spreading across her face. "Thank you, Rosa. I won't let you down." The gallery opening. That evening, the gallery buzzed with excitement. Guests mingled, glasses of wine in hand, as they moved from one exhibit to the next. Michael stood near his section, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. He wore a simple suit John had helped him pick out, but he felt out of place among the well-dressed crowd. Angela arrived shortly after, her face lighting up as she saw Michael. "You look so handsome," she said, pulling him into a hug. "You think so?" Michael asked, his voice uncertain. Angela stepped back, holding his shoulders. "I know so. And look, people are already admiring your work." Michael turned to see a small group gathered around his paintings, their expressions a mix of admiration and curiosity. A young woman stepped forward, pointing to the piece of the boy and the man on the street corner. "This one speaks to me," she said. "It's about resilience, isn't it?" Michael hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. It's about finding hope, even when things feel impossible." The woman smiled. "Thank you for sharing this. It's beautiful." As the night went on, Michael grew more comfortable, engaging with guests and sharing the stories behind his art. By the end of the evening, 2 of his pieces had sold, and several people had left their contact information, expressing interest in his future work. Dreams take flight. In the months that followed, Michael's life continued to transform. David McAllister's foundation officially offered him a scholarship, paving the way for him to attend a prestigious art school. The thought of leaving Brooklyn was daunting, but with Angela and John's encouragement, Michael began to see it as an opportunity to grow. Angela thrived in her new role as assistant manager at the boutique, her confidence blossoming with each new responsibility. She even started hosting community workshops, teaching others how to organize their lives and pursue their goals, no matter the obstacles they faced. John, ever the steady presence, continued to support them both. But as he watched Michael and Angela flourish, he began to take a step back, knowing they no longer needed him as a crutch. One day, as they sat together on the apartment balcony, Michael turned to John. "Why did you help us?" he asked. "You could have walked away, but you didn't." John leaned back in his chair, gazing at the horizon. "Because someone once helped me when I needed it most," he said. "They didn't have to, but they did. And it changed my life. Helping you and your mom. That's just me paying it forward." Michael nodded, understanding now what it meant to truly give without expecting anything in return. "I'm going to do the same," he said quietly. "Someday, I'll help someone the way you helped us." John smiled, pride shining in his eyes. "I know you will, Michael." A new beginning. The day Michael left for art school was bittersweet. Angela hugged him tightly at the train station, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "Go show the world what you're capable of." Michael smiled through his own tears. "I'll make you proud, Mama. I promise." As the train pulled away, Angela stood with John, watching until it disappeared from view. She felt a pang of sadness, but also an overwhelming sense of pride. Michael was chasing his dreams, and she was finally strong enough to support him. "Angela," John said, his voice steady, "this is just the beginning. For both of you." She nodded, her heart full of hope. For the first time in years, the future felt wide open. A blank canvas, ready to be filled with the colors of a life rebuilt, reimagined, and overflowing with possibility. Building a legacy. The train pulled out of Brooklyn, carrying Michael toward a world that once felt unattainable. As he gazed out the window, the city skyline faded into the distance, replaced by rolling hills and open skies. In his lap lay his sketchbook, pages filled with the dreams and memories that had propelled him to this moment. The scholarship to art school wasn't just a ticket to a new life. It was a culmination of his journey and a stepping stone to something even greater. Michael thought about Angela and John, standing on the platform, their faces etched with pride and bittersweet joy. The image of them waving faded into his mind's canvas, and he quickly flipped open his sketchbook to capture it before the moment slipped away. Angela's blossoming confidence. Back in Brooklyn, Angela returned to the boutique with a renewed sense of purpose. Her days were filled with activity, managing the store, mentoring younger employees, and continuing the community workshops she had started. These workshops became a lifeline for struggling families, offering practical advice and emotional support. One Thursday evening, Angela stood before a group of women seated in the community center. The room was warm and inviting, with colorful posters and stacks of resource guides on the tables. Angela began, her voice steady and calm. "There was a time when I didn't think I'd make it through another week, let alone stand here today. My son, Michael, and I were surviving day to day. But one thing I learned is that it's okay to accept help. It's okay to rebuild with someone's support." She paused, letting her words sink in. But here's the thing. Rebuilding is just the start. Once you find your footing, you can become the person who helps others find theirs. That's why we're here tonight. The women nodded, some wiping away tears, others leaning forward, eager to learn. Angela smiled. For so long, she had been the one needing encouragement. Now she was the one giving it, and the power of that transformation wasn't lost on her. At the end of the session, a young mother approached her, holding a toddler on her hip. "Thank you for sharing your story," she said softly. "It gives me hope that maybe things can get better." Angela placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "They will," she said firmly. "And when they do, you'll be the one inspiring someone else." Michael's first day at art school. The campus of the art school was like nothing Michael had ever seen. The towering brick buildings and sprawling green lawns felt almost otherworldly compared to the crowded streets of Brooklyn. He carried his supplies tightly in his arms as he navigated the unfamiliar hallways, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and anxiety. In his first class, Foundations of Fine Art, the professor, an older woman with an eccentric flair, introduced the students to their first project, creating a self-portrait that reflected not just their physical features but their internal journey. Michael felt his pulse quicken. He thought back to his days selling water on the streets, the way he had learned to hide his struggles behind a smile. He thought about John's unexpected kindness and Angela's unwavering resilience. The assignment wasn't just an artistic challenge. It was deeply personal. Over the next few weeks, Michael poured himself into the project. Using layers of paint and mixed media, he created a piece that depicted two versions of himself. One was a small boy standing in the shadow of a city skyline, clutching a cardboard box of water bottles. The other was a young man standing tall in a brightly lit gallery, his eyes filled with determination. Between the two figures, a bridge of golden light connected their worlds. When Michael presented his piece to the class, the room fell silent. The professor approached the canvas, her expression thoughtful. "This," she said finally, "is what art is meant to do. It tells a story. It makes us feel." Her words bolstered Michael's confidence, and he began to believe that he belonged in this space. For the first time, he felt like an artist, not just a boy chasing a dream. John's new mission. While Angela thrived and Michael pursued his education, John found himself reflecting on the impact his actions had made. He had stepped in to help the Rivers because he saw a reflection of his own struggles in their story. Now, seeing their transformation, he realized how powerful small acts of kindness could be. Inspired, John decided to channel his resources into a larger mission. He began working with local organizations to create a mentorship program for at-risk youth. The program, called Pathways Forward, connected young people with mentors who could guide them through challenges whether academic, financial, or emotional. John's first recruits were Marcus, the boy Michael had befriended on the street corner, and a few others he had met through his work in the community. He paired each of them with mentors who understood their struggles, people who could offer guidance and encouragement. Every kid deserves someone in their corner, John told the board of directors at one of the organizations. Someone who believes in them when they can't yet believe in themselves. The program quickly gained traction, drawing attention from local businesses and community leaders. John's vision of creating a support network for young people began to take shape, and the impact was immediate. Marcus, once shy and withdrawn, started attending school regularly and even joined a robotics club. Michael's big break. As the months rolled by, Michael's work at art school continued to evolve. One of his professors noticed his talent for storytelling through art and recommended him for an internship at a prestigious gallery in the city. The opportunity was daunting, but Michael accepted, determined to make the most of it. During the internship, Michael met established artists and learned about the inner workings of the art world. He worked long hours, helping to curate exhibits and even contributing his own ideas for new installations. His enthusiasm didn't go unnoticed. One day, the gallery's director approached him with an offer. "We're planning a special exhibit featuring young, up-and-coming artists," she said. "I'd like you to submit a piece." Michael's heart raced. "Really? You think I'm ready for something like that?" The director smiled. "You've already proven you're ready." Michael spent weeks working on his submission. He created a massive mixed-media piece titled Resilience in Motion, which depicted a series of interconnected moments from his life. His days on the street corner, the kindness of strangers, his mother's recovery, and his own transformation as an artist. When the exhibit opened, Michael's piece was the centerpiece. Angela and John attended the event, their faces glowing with pride as they watched people marvel at Michael's work. Building a legacy. Years later, Michael stood in front of a group of students at the very community center where his journey had begun. His own nonprofit, inspired by John's mentorship program, now offered art workshops to children from underserved communities. He held up one of his earliest sketches, the portrait of Angela sitting at the kitchen table. "This," he told the students, "is where my story began. My art was a way to hold on to hope when things felt impossible. And now, it's my way of giving back." In the back of the room, Angela and John watched with tears in their eyes. The boy they had once nurtured was now a man, building a legacy of kindness and creativity that would ripple out far beyond their small corner of Brooklyn. As Michael's students began working on their own sketches, he leaned against the wall, watching them with a sense of fulfillment he had never imagined. His journey had been filled with struggle, but it had led him here, to a place where hope, resilience, and generosity could flourish. And he knew, deep in his heart, that this was only the beginning.